Hello, this is a re-recording of the lecture that took place the other week on the Taoist philosophies encapsulated in the Dream of the Butterfly story. The original recording we did in class, as you'll probably know, the sound didn't work at all, so it was just me flailing my arms around looking demented, with no speech audible at all. So this is a second attempt at covering that. I'm going to split this into two sections. The first one is going to be exploring the dream of the butterfly, and the second one will go over Moism and the philosophies of Mozi. So we'll tackle it in that way. I don't know how long this is going to last, but we'll go with it anyway. So if we start by setting the scene a little bit, the order I'm going to go through this in will follow the same order as the slides in the PowerPoint, so you can use the two together if you would like. If we start by looking at Zhuangzi. There are regional pronunciations and variations in this, so if you're looking online or what have you, you may find other pronunciations of that. This is my very bad attempt at Chinese, basically. Zhuangzi was a great philosopher who lived somewhere around the 4th century BCE. Exact birth and death dates are unknown for him. Also, the exact date at which he started writing his book that's named after him is also largely unknown, but probably somewhere around the late 300s, somewhere in that region, that he began putting pen to paper. There is this debate that goes on amongst historians, Chinese historians and European ones as well, as to whether he genuinely existed, he was a real person at a point in history, or whether the book attributed to him was perhaps a compilation of different people's works that all got put into the one tome and attributed to the same person who is perhaps rather like a mythical character. Same sorts of arguments that you get around Lao Tzu, that he himself may or may not have existed. And the key point of both the stories of Lao Tzu and the stories of Zhuangzi is that it doesn't really matter. Whether they existed or not, which year they were born in, which year they died in, is kind of besides the point, because the key focus in Taoism is not them as people, but rather their teachings, or at least the teachings attributed to them. So the details of their life are kind of besides the point. The main issue is focusing on the truth and the wisdom and the understanding of the teachings. So what we know of him is very little as a man. The themes that come across in his book are principally that humour is tremendously important from a spiritual point of view. Lots of the stories in the Zhuangzi are quite funny, quite entertaining, very surreal, some of them quite bizarre. Kind of a touch of the Lewis Carrolls about them, if you like. Or perhaps that should be the other way around, wouldn't it, really? That Lewis Carroll had a touch of the Zhuangzi about him. In that a lot of it is very surreal, very oddball, very quirky. And again, it's not direct spiritual sermons or diktats. It's rather these odd stories that the reader is meant to mull over and think about and come to their own conclusions as to what they mean. So nothing is sort of too overt and in your face. It's very, here's a funny story, go away and think about it. It tends to be how it operates. A lot of the themes are similar in a sense to the themes of Lao Tzu's writings, that they reflect dissatisfaction with the greed and the materialism and the corruption of court life in the imperial court. The wish to go away from all of the flummery and the pretense and what have you of royal life and live a simple life, to go up the mountains or out into the forests, and live a life of gentle philosophy and contemplation, away from all of the high etiquette and the self-importance of some of the dignitaries, no doubt, that both Zhuangzi and Lao Tzu must have met and worked with and lived alongside. It's encapsulated. There's one story which is referred to in one of the slides about the magic turtle, And Zhangzhou says, that once upon a time there was this magic turtle, had a sacred turtle, had sort of marvellous abilities, and people were so enamoured of it, they killed the poor thing and cut out the flesh of the poor creature so they could keep the shell, the turtle shell, and use it as a sort of like a fortune-telling device, as a way of predicting the future and having mystical experiences. And the whole point of that story, of course, is that instead of leaving the poor creature to have its lovely little life wandering around the mud banks of the river and having a smashing time of it, it's encapsulated, stuffed in a box, and kept a bit like a butterfly that is poisoned off and then pinned to a board. Whereupon you could argue the very beauty of the butterfly, its movement, it's kind of floating in the air, it's gone the instant you try to capture it as a thing for all time to look at. Just as the life and the magic of the turtle is lost the instant it's killed and stuffed in a box. And that general lesson for life, that often the very thing we value and we want to keep frozen in amber, the act of freezing it in amber kills it, destroys the essence of what made it so wonderful in the first place. You could relate that to all sorts of things. I suppose relationships is a fairly obvious one. You fall madly in love with someone and you try to pin them down and possess them and own them, and that very act of being possessive kills off the love, kills off the romance, kills off the spontaneity of the person and the relationship. If we move from there, before we get too bogged down in agony aunt type stuff, to the dream of the butterfly, which is the most famous of the stories which Zhuangzi tells. The short version, there's a written version uploaded onto the website, but the short version is that a friend is wandering along and they see Zhuangzi sitting having a cup of tea or something, and they go up to him and say, "Oh, I'm kind of surprised you're sitting here calmly drinking tea. Normally at this time in the afternoon you're telling stories, you're entertaining the crowds. How comes you're just sitting here quietly drinking tea and staring off into the middle distance?" And Zhuangzi says, "Well, I had this amazing dream last night, and I've been thinking about it all morning, and I'm sort of lost in thought." And the friend says, "What was the dream?" And Zhuangzi says, "Well, I dreamt that I was a butterfly. And there I was, flying around the fields, visiting the flowers, getting carried on the breeze, having an absolutely wonderful time. And it was so vivid, it was so passionate, the smell of the grass, the feel of the wind, the heat of the sun, the colours of the flowers. It was so real, I began to think I really was the butterfly. And that, in fact, I was a butterfly dreaming that I was Zhuangzi, rather than the other way around. And then suddenly I woke up." "Well," says the friend, that's very interesting. We all have weird and wonderful dreams. Why has it given you such pause for thought?" And the philosopher says, I sit here wondering, in this moment with my tea and the warmth of the sun and the breeze and the smell of the flowers over there. It's so real now, but then my dream was so real then. So am I now a butterfly dreaming I'm a philosopher? Or was I a philosopher dreaming that I was a butterfly? That's pretty much it. The story. It's a very simple story. The point, the underlying meaning and symbolism, if you like, of the story is multifold, multi-level. Dreams can be incredibly real when you're in the middle of them, and then you wake up and being awake feels incredibly real. Well, it does sometimes. Anyway. How do you tell the difference between a dream and reality? When you're in it, frequently you can't. And so you never quite know, are you dreaming at this moment? You think you're on the train, on the bus, walking the dog, doing whatever, but maybe you're actually in bed asleep, and the thing that you feel you're experiencing is product of your mind. Because you don't know, you have to live in the moment, and that's part of the lesson of the thing is to not get too carried away with what's real, what's not real, but always live in the moment. Treat it as if it is real at the moment, and be present in the moment. So it ties in with all of those Buddhist notions of mindfulness and being in the here, in the now, rather than getting too carried away with speculating, is it real, is it not real? At another level, it's also a story about interweaving with all of life. Am I a butterfly dreaming I'm a man, or a man dreaming I'm a butterfly? In a sense, the answer could be both, because reality exists at a multitude of levels. And within Taoist teaching, there is more than one level of reality, more than one world of beings moving between different worlds of gods and spirits and ancestors and the living and so forth. And we can exist in more than one place, more than one way. So you could be both a butterfly that sometimes thinks it's a man and a man that sometimes thinks he's a butterfly. And there is no clear-cut distinction between the two within that story. And so we may be many different things at many different points in our life. And it's allowing the essence of life to move between different states without getting too hung up on which one is the true one and which one is the transitory one, because they're all transitory. So at the moment, my soul is being a human being. Maybe my soul, for all I know, is inhabiting some other lump of flesh somewhere else in existence, where it is in fact a fish, or a bird, or a butterfly, or a tree, or some weird creature I can't even begin to imagine at the moment. And if we factor in reincarnation, maybe I have been other things in the past, I will be other things in the future. How do I know? Does it matter anyway at one level? Because I can be many different things and flow through the cosmos. And it's about going with the flow. It's about experiencing life in all its manifold forms and not getting too hung up on one form or one state. If you want to put that in maybe slightly more straightforward terms, because I realise this is getting a bit trippy, isn't it? You could be married and single. Not at the same time, because if you do that, you'll probably be arrested for bigamy. Or you caught getting up to something by your other half. But you could, at one point in your life you're married, at another point in your life you're single, at some point in the future you could be widowed, you may be a child, one day you may be a parent, one day you're a brother, one day you're not a brother. You are moving between different states of being. One day you're in work, one day you're retired, one day you're unemployed, one day you're this, one day you're that. Go with the flow is the idea within Taoism. Experience being all of those different states at different points in time. And what does time matter anyway? Because on occasion you can experience a multitude of things at the same time. Emotional states, let alone things like being employed or unemployed, married or single or what have you. You may be happy and sad and move between all different states of emotions at different points in time and not get too hung up on one state over and above all other states. It's to experience being many different things. So there's that sort of level of understanding for the story. The story also contains this imagery of the philosopher waking up. He's not waking up from being a butterfly to being a human or vice versa. He is rather waking up to the nature of reality being dreamlike. That, I can call this, every single thing in the room I'm now sitting in is the product of somebody's imagination. So the chest of drawers over there, the TV set, the ornaments on the mantelpiece, the paintings on the wall, the chairs, everything here at some point existed in somebody's imagination. And that somebody, or a whole bunch of somebodies, sat down and brought their imagination into physical manifestation. They made it real. They painted the pictures, they designed and constructed the sofa, they made that pair of shoes over there. They did all of those different things. Everything which, well, almost everything which exists in a sense can be said to have started in the human imagination. Even in the garden where it's trees and flowers and whatnot, obviously the human imagination didn't invent the trees and the flowers, but the imagination of the gardener decided where to put the trees and where to put the flowers and which flowers to put there in the first place and so forth. And if you want to go back a step, many religions, not just Taoism, many religions have the idea that the trees and the flowers and the rocks and the rivers and the birds and the beasts and the insects and so forth, they themselves once started in the imagination of the divine. So even the things that the human mind isn't capable of producing, there is another greater mind, or set of minds, because Taoism is polytheist, which creates manifestation creates life, and we can understand all of those things as existing, all of those things as being real. And sometimes we may wake up to experience those different things. So going from one state to another, one set of being to another, understanding that reality itself is a product of imagination, is a product of different states of mind, an analytical state of mind, a dreamy state of mind, an artistic state of mind, all of that sort of thing. We experience all of those different ways of being, and it shapes the reality around us. So whether Zhuangzi is the butterfly dreaming a human, or a human dreaming he's a butterfly, either reality is a product of dream state. Either reality is a product of imagination. The kind of person I am today, you could argue, is the product of what I've thought about, dreamed about, daydreamed about, imagined, planned over the last many decades to become the kind of person I am today. And the kind of person I am in 20 years' time, if I'm still alive in 20 years' time, will be the product of the sorts of dreaming I am doing today, the sorts of imagining and planning and mulling and thinking. What's going on in my head will shape the kind of person I will become in the future, as with all of us. So the capacity to imagine is immensely powerful. It creates reality in so many different ways. And this very short story is about understanding the power of imagination to shape reality, and also to decide what is valuable and what is not. Because if we say something, oh, it's just a dream, as if it was a nothing, a dismissal, we are effectively saying whatever we thought of in that state of mind doesn't count, isn't worth bothering with. And that is a powerful act in itself, deciding what is important, but also equally deciding what is not important, what can be dismissed and written off as an irrelevancy, and what needs to be focused on as tremendously important and useful and what have you. So if you think about the Protestant work ethic that used to still does say, being idle and daydreaming is a waste of time and pointless, it fails to recognise that you can come up with fantastic ideas when you're daydreaming. Those fantastic ideas can shape reality and be put into reality. So it's not a waste of time to sit under a tree in a hammock, kind of swaying away and enjoying the breeze and thinking about everything and nothing all at the same time, because ideas that come into your mind at times like that will potentially one day transform your life or transform other people's lives. So there is that image of the power to dream, the power to make the world through dreams. The waking up, these days it takes on a whole new meaning, which wasn't around in Zhuangzi's days, wasn't even around when I was young, let alone in Zhuangzi's days. To be woke these days has taken on this depressingly political notion of connotations to a very specific set of political outlooks, with the implication that if you don't share those political outlooks, you ain't woke, you's asleep. And it also ties in not only to a particular set of politics, but it also lots of internet-fueled notions of conspiracy theories and paranoia. So people talk about being red-pilled and waking up, becoming aware of the nature of reality, the nature that they're being manipulated by government, by media, by whatever else. All of which is perfectly true, actually. We are being manipulated by those things. But people who describe themselves as woke are often coming from a very particular set of political and philosophical outlooks. And you could say to some extent there is an element of egoism in it. It is somewhat reminiscent of a quote from Oscar Wilde that if you need to tell people you're intelligent, then you're probably not. Because it should be self-evident. So I think being aware of the true nature of life, woke, if you will, has a flavour of that about it, in that if you need to run around telling people how woke you are, you probably are not woke. You're probably not all that aware, because if you were, it would be blatantly obvious and you wouldn't need to tell them. So in the Taoist philosophical sense, putting aside modern day Western politics, in the Taoist sense, what does it mean to wake up? It means to become aware of the nature of reality. not in terms of mad conspiracy theories, or in terms of being very left wing or very right wing or very whatever else, and thinking that is truth. It is rather perhaps to become aware of the very nature of the cosmos itself, to be aware of the nature of the human soul, and to see where you are going in life and how you are shaping your life, so that you don't sleepwalk gormlessly through life. You go stepping through life deliberately, intentionally, mindfully, making wise choices about what you do, because you start to understand the consequences of what you do. Understand the consequences of how to create and shape life, rather than just blundering carelessly through it. And in that sense, that's really what those early Chinese philosophers were talking about. Nothing to do with politics, but being self-aware, and not only aware of who you are, but also aware of the nature of the cosmos and where you fit into it, and how it fits into you. Of course, two-way street. There's a debate that goes on as to whether Zhuangzi chose the butterfly at random. I mean, he could have said he dreamt he was a cat, or he dreamt he was a goldfish, or he dreamt he was an elephant. He could have claimed to have dreamt, could have been any creature in the dream. So was it just butterfly by chance? That's the first thing that popped into the author's head, and he wrote that down in the story. Or is there an intentional element to it was definitely a butterfly for a particular reason rather than any other creature? If it was just purely random, well, we'll never know that now. If it was intentional, then there is an argument that goes that the reason the butterfly is chosen is because you have the three stages of the butterfly's existence. The caterpillar, the chrysalis, the butterfly. And that goes with this image of becoming awake to the nature of reality. It's the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. That when you're blundering through life half asleep, you're in the chrysalis state. Or you could argue when you're just consuming in materialism and bogged down with the nonsense that we fill our lives with on a daily basis, that's more like the caterpillar state, when you're just kind of gobbling up everything in sight before you fall into this comatose state, and then eventually, if you're lucky, you emerge from that dried up chrysalis as this glorious, beautiful creature, which, real butterflies obviously have a very short lifespan. You can hope the human soul, is the soul human? Is it beyond human? If you take a Taoist approach, then it's not necessarily tied to humanity. It is a force that moves through the cosmos in many different shapes. Hopefully it is not short-lived, but then maybe that's just a hang-up we have about time and fear of death and temporality and so on. So you can reflect on this story in terms of your own life. Are you a caterpillar, gobbling everything up? Are you a chrysalis, just sort of snoozing gently and changes are going on deep within you, but you're barely aware of them because you're asleep? Or are you the butterfly emerged from the chrysalis, flying around on the breeze, bringing glorious colour and beauty and delicacy and what have you to the cosmos? I think the size of my waistline, I know which one I am. If you are either in the caterpillar or the chrysalis state, then part of the philosophy of the story is to think about when you will become the butterfly. At what point in your existence will you transmute? Will you metamorphose into this glorious, beautiful, brilliant thing? And it's not necessarily saying, oh, you should be doing it now, right this minute. Because there's no pressure of time. There's no urgency. There is rather a gentle, gradual move to arriving in that state when it is meant to be. Just as the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis at the right moment. It's not rushing, galloping along to get there. It's just taking its time, it's getting there, it's achieving what it needs to achieve, and then the metamorphosis happens when it needs to happen. And this sort of underpinning notion in Taoism of spiritual evolution is in the same sense, that you shouldn't gallop like a lunatic to get there. Sign up to every meditation class, mindfulness class, yoga class, crystal magic glass, whatever else, in this desperate rush to speed up the state of enlightenment. Rather, you should just go with the flow, which you could argue is perhaps one of the central teachings in Taoism, is to go with the flow, to go where the movement of nature takes, to go with the flow of the river, with the grain of the wood, go where it's taking you, and you'll get there when you get there. And when the transformation happens, it will be wonderful, but why rush? Enjoy being a caterpillar and eating everything in sight, cake. Enjoy being a chrysalis and just hanging there, swinging from a twig, sleeping and having deep chrysalis-type dreams. And then when the butterfly, the awakening happens, then you'll be in the zone and it'll be fantastic. And what kind of wings will you have? What kind of colours will you bring to the universe? Will you be a healer, a teacher, a warrior, a tap dancer, a storyteller? Who knows what you might be? But perhaps to mull over the possibilities of what you might become. And to bear in mind that no matter how little self-esteem you might have at the moment, how you feel that you can never be anything exciting or interesting, that you're just some dull, lumpy thing that's never going to be anything other than a dull, lumpy thing. The caterpillar looks in the mirror and all it sees is a dull, lumpy thing. It one day will be something different. Every single one of us, no matter where we start, one day will be something different. Well, for one thing, we'll be dead. But in a positive sense, you might become something different. In a spiritual sense, you might emerge to become something different. And it's allowing the possibility. So no matter how down or doom and gloom you feel on a bad day, to allow that one day you may be something way more thrilling than you are at the moment, and that butterfly will emerge and fly away. There's a quote from Lao Tzu that it's only when you let go of who you are that you allow the possibility to become who you will be. And that can be understood in a lot of different levels. People who hold on to jobs fearing retirement or unemployment and don't allow that they could be anything other than what they're working at as today. People who are stuck in dead-end relationships and clinging on to them, not allowing that one day they could have something far better. People who have unhealthy habits, stuck in a rut, repeating the same mistakes again and again, not allowing that one day there could be something else, something different. And a new way of life could emerge from them if they allowed it to happen, if they stopped clinging on like a demented limpet to the past and allowed the future to emerge. And that fits in very well with Zhuangzi's ideas as well as Lao Tzu's ideas. There's in the book that Zhuangzi wrote, there are 33 odd chapters. Some of the book has been lost to history, been destroyed over time, but there's surviving 33 chapters. And they're full of these weird and wonderful stories and anecdotes. And I won't go over all of them because you can track down the book and read them for yourselves. But I'll give you a couple that are included in the PowerPoints, and then we'll mention two ideas to finish with. And I'll call it a day and record the bit about Mozi's and his philosophies a bit later. So one of the stories is told of Lickety, Wonton and Split, who are kings of different parts of the world. Lickety and Split, these are English translations of the Chinese names, obviously. Lickety and Split go and visit quite regularly their friend Wonton and have a wonderful time with him, and it's always smashing and lovely. But in discussions with themselves, they point out, well, I have 7 holes. You have 7 holes. If you're wondering what the 7 holes are, or you're thinking this is going to get something really surreal, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, and a mouth. The 7 holes. Poor old Wonton has no holes. Let's not think about that too much. So, Lickety and Split decide that as a supreme act of kindness, they will help out their old chum Wonton by visiting him once a day for 7 days, and on each day they turn up with a drill, a Black & Decker, and they drill a hole into Wonton. So he will have 7 holes by the end of 7 days. Long story short, or short story shorter, he dies. What is the moral of this tale? I'm sure you can work it out for yourself, but it is that they have tried to make wonton conform out of pure kindness. It's not cruelty, it's not tyranny, it's not any of that. They genuinely think they're helping him, they're genuinely thinking they're being kind and giving him something he lacks. But they tried to make him conform to what they regard as normal, rather than appreciating him for what he is. Now, in this identity politics-driven era, that perhaps rings particularly true in all sorts of ways, in that we're increasingly thinking and realising that there are lots of people who are different in some shape, form or capacity, and that mainstream society, parents, friends, family, employers, what have you, again, perhaps out of straightforward kindness, they're not being and this I think is where maybe we depart, where identity politics departs from Chinese philosophy. And yet quite often identity politics assumes it is being done for reasons of tyranny and wickedness and evilness, whereas the philosophical approach would say, well, actually it's, most of the time at least, it is done out of a wish to help, out of a feeling that wouldn't this person be so much happier if they were normal like the rest of us, rather than valuing them for what they are. And so attempts are made to try and metaphorically drill holes in the individual so that they become like everyone else, become like the mainstream. And doing so will either, well, sometimes quite, in actuality, kill them off, and sometimes a more metaphorical killing off, or sort of leaving them dead inside, that kind of thing. So the push to make people conform to what is perceived as normal can become incredibly disruptive, in that it frequently fails to appreciate people for what they are. And this echoes straight back to that story about the magic turtle, that instead of appreciating the magic turtle in its natural state, swimming around in the river and what have you, it tries to encapsulate the magic turtle in the wrong environments, kill it, stuff it in a box. Again, rather than appreciating wonton for what wonton was, they go and drill holes in the poor guy and turn him into, well, a corpse, because he can't survive with those holes in him. So as a story, it's a funny little story, a weird little thing, but it contains all these ideas that we are coming back to, resonating with, if you like, in the 21st century, that you need to try and appreciate people for what they are, what makes them unique and lovely. Why do you like them in the first place? Because of who they are now, not because of who you could turn them into. Maybe therein is a message for an awful lot of people who are having difficult marriages. How many difficult marriages become difficult because two people fall in love with what they are at the moment, and then one of them decides, actually, I can make you better. I can make you into something better than you are. And that marriage becomes miserable because one person is berating and trying to turn the other one into something that they're not suited to being, rather than just appreciating them for what they are in the start. Not just marriages. I'm sure that applies to many friendships. It probably applies to parent-child relationships, to maybe employer-employee relationships, of trying to browbeat someone to fit a mould they don't well fit. So it's kind of understanding the various different meanings and metaphors within that story. There are other stories that are uploaded on the PowerPoint. One's about Zhangzi mourning for his wife, and other people feeling he's not mourning quite enough, and the philosopher replies, well, I have known her all of her life as she's changed over the course of her life, and she's now in the afterlife, and one day I will meet her again, so what's the point of screaming, wailing and tearing my hair out and creating all this sort of burden when one day I'll see her again? So why not just yet again go with the flow, go where life is taking us? Last two bits to briefly mention are two philosophical concepts that are cited within Taoism and mentioned in different texts. One is Wu Wei. Wu Wei is to do things without effort. Without effort because they flow naturally from the self, from the person doing the action, rather than being something forced and artificial and unnatural in a sense. So the musician who plays music because it comes naturally, the dancer who dances because it comes naturally, the singer who sings because it comes naturally, the painter who paints because it comes naturally. All of that is Wu Wei, going with the flow, doing what comes naturally to you, expressing this creativity, this artistry, whether it's baking cakes, making macrame, I don't know, fashion design, wiring up a car, doing whatever on earth it is that comes to you naturally. Moving in a direction that your soul naturally moves in is the ideal way to go through life. It's not only a description of what people do, it's also a philosophical recommendation that they should do more of it. Why spend your life trying to carve wood against the grain? Why spend your life trying to paddle upriver or make yourself do stuff that you can't really do terribly well? Stuff that goes against your inner nature and makes you unhappy, and you end up doing a rubbish job of it anyway. When you could spend your life doing what comes readily, doing what comes naturally, moving in the natural direction your soul is moving in. That does mean, of course, you've got to have some idea to start with what direction your soul is moving in. And I dare say we've all met people, or perhaps been in that state ourselves, when we don't really know what it is we're good at or capable of. And we struggle to know what would come naturally because we perhaps haven't explored different options, different avenues to find what we're good at. So it's, I suppose, perhaps also a recommendation that you should be open-minded, explore around, and then you might find the thing that your soul would express itself through. Or bunch of things. It doesn't have to be just the one thing, it can be many things. But where you go naturally. The other related concept is Jiran. Jiran is the idea of being your true self, being authentic to yourself rather than putting on airs and graces and flummery and pretense. Don't fake it, just be you. Which, as an idea, doesn't go down desperately well with the communist government for all sorts of relatively obvious reasons. They've never been mad keen on Taoism because it doesn't sit well with that nasty, oppressive, grey-minded mentality that wants everyone to conform and look the same and behave the same and obey, which communism just weighs the soul down with its deadness. Whereas Taoism is about embracing life in its joyfulness, about embracing self in its joyfulness. That I suppose you could relate it to, for example, Immanuel Kant's call for honesty and the importance of honesty. It's not just about telling the truth and doing the George Washington thing and saying, yes, I did cut down that tree or whatever. It's also about being authentic and true and honest in your behaviour. So do stuff because you enjoy doing it, not because you do it through gritted teeth and only pretend you like it when really you don't like it. It's about, these days I suppose we would relate it to all kinds of other issues, sexuality and gender and this and that. But it goes way beyond that kind of thing in placing the importance on being an authentic human, an authentic person who expresses themselves and thinks and feels and talks and behaves in ways that are true to them, rather than constantly putting on a false mask, putting on an affront. It does have to be said that Jiran somewhat assumes, rather like the humanistic movements from Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, that the true self is something lovely. It doesn't assume that some people's true self could be a serial killer or a paedophile or a Big Brother contestant or something equally vile and awful. Because obviously that would really throw a spanner in the works if somebody says, well, yes, I've chainsawed my next door neighbours into 37 pieces because that is my true self to do so, and I loved doing it. It's what came naturally. That would be a bit of a gruesome interpretation of Jiran and the whole way, the effortlessly flowing in the right direction. It assumes the right direction is a very creative, beautiful one, that we are all butterflies on the inside rather than Jack the Rippers on the inside. And we have to hope that's true. Because if there is anyone who is naturally Jack the Ripper on the inside, then that, well, somewhat scuppers and undermines the philosophical stance. I think we'll leave that there for the moment. And then I'll do a separate recording on Moist theory, either tonight or tomorrow, and I'll move that for you to read. Listen to. Okay. Hope that was reasonably okay and encapsulated most of what was said in the class, even though the audio bit of the recording didn't work.